The most important conversation in Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer never happened. Not a single word of it. The scene that critics compared to the Rosebud moment in Citizen Kane, the scene that made audiences sit in silence as the credits rolled. The scene between two aging men standing beside a pond in Princeton as one of them admits that the catastrophe they feared has already begun. Christopher Nolan invented every syllable of it. And that is just the beginning of what this film got wrong, compressed, or quietly buried, because hiding underneath the 7 Academy Awards and the $900 million at the box office is a true story, far darker, far stranger, and far more devastating than anything that made it to the screen. By the end of this video, you will know what really happened by that pond, what Oppenheimer actually said the moment the first nuclear bomb exploded, the myth about Kyoto, that an actor improvised on set and the world mistook for history, and the story of one person the film never mentions at all, a story so heartbreaking it changes the moral weight of everything that came before it. Stay until the end, because that last piece is the one that will stay with you. If this is the kind of content you want more of, subscribe right now, hit the like button, and drop a comment below telling me which film I should investigate next. Now let's get into it. Julius Robert Oppenheimer was born in New York City in 1904 into the kind of wealth that produces either extraordinary people or extraordinarily useless ones. His family hung original Van Goghs in the apartment. He was corresponding with professional geologists. At age 10, he learned Dutch in 6 weeks in order to deliver a physics lecture in the language. He completed his Harvard degree. In 3 years, graduated summa cum laude, went to Cambridge and then to Germany, and by his mid-20s was one of the most talented theoretical physicists alive. He was also, as his closest colleagues and his biographers have documented in considerable detail, a man who suffered from depression, restlessness, and deep anxiety. The poisoned apple scene in Nolan's film is based on something that actually occurred. While at Cambridge, Oppenheimer did obtain poison and place it on the desk of his supervisor, Patrick Blackett, a man he felt was ignoring and humiliating him. The poison's exact identity is unconfirmed by the historical record. Nolan chose potassium cyanide because audiences recognize the name. What did not happen, however, is that Niels Bohr nearly ate it. That detail, the great physicist reaching for the dangerous fruit while a panicked young Oppenheimer rushes to stop him, that is pure invention. Oppenheimer's own grandson has confirmed there is no historical record of Bohr's involvement, and the authors of American Prometheus acknowledge the same. Nolan invented the scene because it communicates something emotionally true about who Oppenheimer was. It is a beautiful scene. It never happened. Now, jump forward to Los Alamos, 1943. A secret city materialized on a mesa in the New Mexico desert, and already the film is leaving things out. The construction of the Manhattan Project's central laboratory required the forced removal of 30 Native American families from the Pajarito Plateau. They were given almost no notice, and their homes were demolished. The film makes no mention of this, and there is more. The Trinity test on July 16, 1945, sent a radioactive cloud drifting across the surrounding landscape, with no warning to anyone living there. Shoshone, Navajo, Hopi, and Hualapai peoples, along with Hispanic and Anglo-ranching families, were exposed to fallout. Decades later, residents of towns like Tularosa would describe family trees branching out in every direction into cancer. The government told them nothing. The film shows none of this. What the film does show, what it chooses to center, is the extraordinary intellectual world of Los Alamos itself, and in this, it largely succeeds. Hans Bethe, Richard Feynman, Niels Bohr, Enrico Fermi, Edward Teller. The roster reads like the guest list for a party that the entire history of 20th century physics attended. And at its head was Oppenheimer, 38 years old, guiding some of the most difficult egos in science toward a single shared question. Was it possible to make the sun happen on Earth? The moment it happened, the famous line did not come in the way the film suggests. The film places "Now I Am Become Death," the destroyer of worlds, in a scene of intimacy with Jen Tatlock. Oppenheimer scholars found this deeply uncomfortable because it reduces an ancient philosophical text and a lifelong spiritual relationship to a dramatic device in a love scene. In reality, Oppenheimer recalled that line in 1965 in an NBC documentary. "We knew the world would not be the same," he said. What he said in the actual moment in the desert, with his brother Frank standing beside him as the cloud rose. It worked. That was it. The philosophical reckoning came years later, as it always does. But there is another line from that morning that cuts even deeper, one that the film does include and that deserves more attention. Kenneth Bainbridge, the director of the Trinity test, walked over to Oppenheimer after the explosion and said, "Now we are all sons of bitches." Oppenheimer later wrote to Bainbridge that those were the best words anyone said after the test. "We do not have to explain them to anyone," he added. There is a precision in that exchange, a refusal of both celebration and self-justification that tells you more about who these men were than any amount of dramatized dialogue. Now we come to the invented conversations between Oppenheimer and Einstein, which are structurally the most important scenes in the film and historically the most significant departures from the record. Kai Bird, who co-authored American Prometheus, has confirmed publicly that both conversations are fictional. The men did share a campus at Princeton and almost certainly took walks beside that pond. But what they said, the conversation about igniting the atmosphere, the admission that the catastrophe had already begun, those are Christopher Nolan's words, not theirs. Nolan invented them because they are the emotional and philosophical core of the story he wanted to tell. Henry Stimson and the city of Kyoto. In the film, the Secretary of War removes Kyoto from the target list because he and his wife had spent their honeymoon there. Historians have confirmed that the honeymoon story is a myth. Stimson did intervene to protect Kyoto, but his reasons were cultural and geopolitical. He believed its destruction would make a lasting peace impossible. The honeymoon detail was actually improvised on set by actor James Remar. It stayed in the film, and now it circulates on the internet as historical fact. What was not invented and what the film captures with genuine power is the central story of the post-war years. The destruction of Oppenheimer's career at the hands of Louis Strauss. The animosity between these two men grew from a moment of public humiliation in 1949 when Oppenheimer made Strauss look foolish during a Senate hearing. Strauss, a colleague noted, has more elbows than an octopus. He did not forget. By 1953, Strauss was the new chairman of the AEC, and he began to move. He constructed a dossier, alleging that Oppenheimer was likely a Soviet spy, an allegation for which no credible evidence ever existed. And President Eisenhower ordered Oppenheimer's clearance suspended. The 4-week hearing that followed in 1954 was one of the most extraordinary events in American science. Oppenheimer's lawyers were blocked from accessing classified materials, and 2 of his closest associates testified against him: General Leslie Groves and Edward Teller. The scientific community never forgave Teller for this. He was shunned by colleagues for the rest of his life. The panel found Oppenheimer to be a loyal citizen. There was no evidence of espionage, none, and yet his clearance was revoked. The decision was not a security ruling. It was a punishment for having said inconvenient things about nuclear policy. Physicist Isidore Rabi said afterward, "He was a man of peace, and they destroyed him." In 2022, the Department of Energy formally vacated the 1954 decision. A posthumous vindication, 70 years too late to matter to the man it concerned. Now here is what the film never tells you. What I told you at the beginning would change the moral weight of everything else in this story. Oppenheimer had a daughter named Toni. She grew up in the long shadow of her father's legend and his destruction. She had a gift for language and applied for a position as a translator at the United Nations. The United Nations required a security clearance, and the FBI conducted a background investigation. Because her father had had his security clearance revoked in 1954. Because the machinery of the national security state had decided that J. Robert Oppenheimer was a risk. Toni Oppenheimer never received her security clearance. She never got the job she had spent years preparing for. She died by suicide in 1977. She was 32 years old. The punishment meted out to Oppenheimer did not end with him. It moved through time. It moved through blood. It took a young woman who had done nothing at all, who just wanted to help people understand each other, and made her pay the price for her father's inconvenient conscience. That story is not in the film. It happens after the credits roll. Robert Oppenheimer died in February 1967 at 62 of throat cancer. He had spent his final years in a kind of dignified exile, still writing, but no longer trusted by the country he had served. He had built the weapon that ended the war. He had tried to prevent the arms race the weapon made inevitable. He had been right about almost everything, and destroyed for it anyway. The Bhagavad Gita contains a teaching about performing one's duty without attachment to the outcome. Do what must be done because it must be done. The consequences belong to the universe, not to you. Oppenheimer tried to live by this. What the historical record shows is a man who spent the last 20 years of his life unable to escape the consequences of the one morning in the desert that had defined everything. Christopher Nolan made a great film, but it is not a complete one. The true story of J. Robert Oppenheimer is longer, darker, and more morally unresolved than 3 hours of cinema can hold. The pond scene is invented, but emotionally true. The honeymoon story is a myth created on set by an actor. The poisoned apple nearly killed no one famous. And a young woman who just wanted to help people understand each other never got that chance, because the machinery her father built to protect a country kept running long after he was gone, and it ran over her. If this video gave you something you didn't have before, subscribe right now, leave a comment telling me what hit you hardest, and share this with someone who thinks they already know the full story of Oppenheimer. They don't. Neither did I until I looked.